finally, we find that wealth can get to our hearts and minds and destroy our relationships and destroy our obligations and make even blood relatives become enemies. I've seen it in business dealings, in business partnerships, in inheritance. A father dies, a mother dies, the children start to divide and fight over the inheritance, a'udhu billah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has clearly stipulated exactly whose right is what. And we heard about those two men who entered upon the Prophet Dawood alayhi salam, one of the greatest judges. And they were in fact angels in the form of humans. To test Dawood alayhi salam, to teach him a lesson, Allah wanted to teach him something. They acted like they were two partners in a business, and one of them said, my brother here, my partner, did this and that to me, and he took my wealth and didn't repay me, such and such. Dawood alayhi salam was still asleep and he had woken up and he was a bit distorted. And he said to them, immediately without hearing the other side of the story, your partner has oppressed you, he owes you this and he owes you that, now go. And they left. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to him Jibreel to tell him, you have dealt with them unjustly. You did not hear the other side of the story and you gave judgment. So, فَخَرَّ رَاكِعًا وَأَنَابٍ. The Quran says that Dawood alayhi salam went down in prostration to the ground and he came closer to Allah and asked him for his forgiveness. Allah tested him. What did he test it with? A judge cannot judge when they are not fully aware. So he just woke up. Number two, when they're distraught. Number three, without hearing both sides of the story. And number four, if there is conflict of interest. But what Dawood alayhi salam said here that I want to highlight, he said to them, وَإِنَّ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْخُلَطَاءِ لَيَبْغِي بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي. Many partners in dealings and business, majority of them, they transgress each other and do wrong by each other, except very few whom Allah has given mercy. So fear Allah in your partnership dealings and your transactions. And fear Allah. There is a whole ayah. You know what an ayah is? What's an ayah in the Quran? A verse. For example, وَالضُّحَى. That's an ayah. Sometimes the ayah is a bit longer. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. That's longer. Sometimes it's a few lines. Sometimes it's half a page. And sometimes it's only one time in the entire Quran. There is one ayah that appears the entire page. Why is this ayah so long and why do we have to finish it? It is called the ayah of debts. In fact, it doesn't just talk about debts, it talks about contracts, debts, how to witness debts and how to write it. It talks about transactions. Let's see. I'm not going to recite the whole verse. I'm just going to give you the summary, the points, the important points it discusses. Number one, it says, and these are my words, of course, I'm just summarizing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Beware leaving behind financially. Oh, sorry, I exclaimed. It says, number one, right. So it's chapter number 2, verse 282. Verse 282. It says, if you enter into a loan agreement, then you must write it down. That's the first thing it says. You must what? You must write it down. Some people, because they're their friend or their relative or their father or mother or their brother or their sister, they think that if they write it down, they take it as if it's a distrust. Wrong. We have to stop this trend and this misconception. It is an obligation to write it down. Number two, or get an independent person to write it and he shouldn't refuse. Get someone else to write it if you like. The point has to be written. Number three, the debtor dictates to the writer what to write. The next point, fear Allah and detail every term clearly. You have to be very detailed and clear. The next point, if the debtor is not fit enough, maybe they're not very mature enough, let their guardian write it on his or her behalf. Do you see how much writing is so emphasized? And Allah then says, two trustworthy men have to witness to the agreement. And if you cannot find two trustworthy men, Allah says, then one trustworthy man and two trustworthy women. Why? Because Allah says, if one woman forgets, the other one reminds her. But then you might say, what, in this day and age, women work with? The answer to that, brothers and sisters, is not that women are less knowledgeable or less logical or less rational or less in their brain or their mind. No, this is a misunderstanding. It is because the nature of majority of women. Number one, it's not an obligation for women to financially be responsible for families, which then causes that, it necessitates that many women throughout time and even in the world today will not be dealing much with finances unless she wants to. Number three, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that since the obligation of finance is not on women, therefore a woman may, because she's not involved in it all the time, she may forget. She may be pregnant, she may be going through child rearing and so on and so forth, where she has more likeliness to forget what it was. So write it down. Anyway, Allah then says, the witnesses must not refuse if called to give evidence later. The next one, no slackness or negligence in detailing the transactions and the terms. Then Allah says, must clearly write the terms due date. Then He says, this is fairest and more just so that there are no ambiguities, doubts or accusations later on. Then Allah says, but immediate transactions like a sale or a purchase that is on the spot, you are not obliged to write it, but it is preferable to write it, i.e. invoices and receipts. And lastly, the scribe, the person who wrote it, must never be threatened or caused any harm. So brothers and sisters, this whole ayah is talking so much about the rights of people's finances and debts that it must be in this manner.